Alright, hello everyone. Today's topic is broken access control, and let's kick off. The first thing that you have to know about the broken access control, pay attention to, are the authentication and session management. So, what is authentication? Authentication identifies the user and confirms that they are who they say they are. Authentication basically is the process of verifying who a user is and how this it happens with username and password, combination of username and password. And if there is a match, the user has been authenticated. Now we have the session management. Session management identifies which subsequent HTTP requests are being made by the same user. For the session management, once you authenticated to the application, you want to visit different pages, for example, bank detail pages, or make any transactions. So all the pages from the particular website are authenticated pages and you have to be authenticated. It will be a huge hassle to add every time your username and password to the username and password. So that's why the session management comes into place. When you first authenticate, the web application generates a unique token which is tied to your username and it's identical to a password, but it's a short-lived one, meaning only for the current session that you are using the web application. The token basically verify the identity every time you make a request to the web application, and this basically is the set cookie. That's the session. So now, knowing what is authentication and knowing what is session management, let's describe what is access control. Access control is basically equal to authorization. So it determines whether the user is allowed to carry out the action that they are attempting to perform. Okay. And now, knowing this, what is broken access vulnerability? It's a type of security flaw that allows an unauthorized user access to restricted resources. So that's what it is. Now, what's the difference between broken authentication and broken access control? The broken authentication is equal to authentication. So the authentication is who are you? Validate the identification of the user, while the broken access control is basically responsible for the authorization. So what are you allowed to do? That's the access control. Check users' permissions to access data. That's the difference between the two vulnerabilities. Okay, let's say additional things for the authentication and authorization. So as we said, the broken authentication is related to the authentication. And the authentication determines whether users are who they claim to be, while the authorization determines what users can and cannot access. Also, authentication challenges the user to validate credentials, for example, passwords, answer to security questions, or any facial recognition, while the authorization verifies whether access is allowed through policies and rules. Authentication usually is done before the authorization, of course, as we have to first authenticate, and the authorization is usually done after successful authentication, when then we can basically check what we are allowed to do. Authentication, it usually needs the user's login details, while the authorization requires users' privilege or security levels. And last, authentication generally transmits information through an ID tokens, while the authorization generally transmits information through an access token. Okay, and let's move to some. Alright, so now let's have a look at the different types of broken access control. But before that, broken access control, as you said, is a type of security flaw that allows an unauthorized user access to restricted resources. So normally there are three types of broken access control. The first one is horizontal, bypassing of access control. So an unprivileged user gains access to other users' accounts with equivalent privileges. What this means. So let's say you have access to user A, and after that you have access to user B or C or whatever. They have the same level of permissions, as you can see here in the example. You've managed to get access to this ID and that ID as well, but as we said, it's the same. They have the same level of permission. What about the vertical bypassing of access control? An attacker gets a higher level of privilege, like root or super user privilege. Here we can see. So instead of achieving access to other users with the same permissions, he basically elevated their privileges to admin. You can see the example here when you have access to the analyst dashboard, but after that we have access to the admin dashboard, where of course we have more privileges to do different things in contrast with the analyst level of permissions. And the last one is the context-dependent bypassing of access control. So what is this? Let's imagine we have an e-commerce website and the client added item into the cart, pay everything from the cart, and then try to change the item to the cart after the payment, and basically they managed to succeed. So this is the context-dependent bypassing of access control. The website should prevent users from modifying the contents of their shopping cart after they have made the payment. Okay, now let's see some attack vectors. What is an attack vector? An attack vector or threat vector is a way for attackers to enter a network or system. There are many attack vectors associated with the broken access control vulnerability. However, some of the most common methods used to exploit these vulnerabilities include injection flows. Injection flows occur when untrusted input is injected into an application, resulting in unintended behavior. This can be exploited to gain unauthorized access to sensitive data or modify application data. Examples can be SQL injection, command injection, directory traversal or path traversal, and they all involve code injection. The next one is cross-site scripting. It's a kind of injection again. So cross-site scripting flows occurs when untrusted input is included in web page output. Attackers can exploit this to execute malicious scripts in the user's browser, resulting in session hijacking, cookie theft, or other malicious activity. And if you want to know more about cross-site scripting, please check out my other video for cross-site scripting. I also have for SQL injection if you are more interested in details about SQL injection. And the last vector that is very common, broken authentication and session management. These flows occur when an application fails to properly validate or protect information associated with the user authentication and sessions. An attacker can exploit this to gain access to resources or data they shouldn't have access to. Okay, so the last slide, broken access control prevention. So let's see how we can prevent this vulnerability. The first one is access control measures. Okay, so one of the most important steps in preventing broken access control is to design access control measures that are robust and effective. Access control design should consider the different roles and level of access that users or entities need and ensure that the appropriate restrictions are in place. For example, it's important to limit access to administrative functions to only those users who need it, and to ensure that access is granted based on the principle of least privilege. This means that users are given only the minimum level of access that they need to perform their job and no more. The next one is authentication and authorization. Authentication and authorization are two key components of access control. To prevent broken access control, it's important to ensure that both authentication and authorization are implemented correctly. Authentication should be implemented using strong and reliable techniques such as multi-factor authentication or biometric authentication. Authorization should be designed to ensure that users are only given access to the resources that they are authorized to access. The next one is input validation and output encoding. This is another important technique for preventing broken access control. It's the input validation and output encoding. Input validation refers to the process of checking user input to ensure that it's valid and safe. Output encoding refers to the process of encoding output data to prevent it from being misinterpreted or exploited. The next one is error handling. Access control errors can occur due to various reasons such as incorrect user inputs, system failure, and unexpected conditions. It's important to implement proper error handling mechanisms to prevent attackers from exploiting such errors to gain unauthorized access. Error messages should not expose sensitive information and should be worded in a clear and simple manner so that users can comprehend them. If you want to know more information about the error handling, you can check my SQL injection video. Alright, the next suggestion for preventing this vulnerability is access control based on roles. The role-based access control is an access control approach that allocates permissions to individuals based on their organizational role. This method assures that users only have access to the resources they require to execute their job obligations, while all preventing illegal access to sensitive data and systems. Alright, and we have regular audit and testing. Regular auditing and testing access control measures is crucial in preventing broken access control. This includes both internal and external audits, as well as regular penetration testing. An internal audit can identify weaknesses in the system and help address them before they become a problem. External audits can ensure that the system is secure from outside threats. Alright, this brings me to the end of my video. Thank you for watching. I hope this was beneficial for you. Please subscribe, and if you like this video, please share, like, and comment for more videos like this one. See you in the next video.